The foundation's first spring was busy enough that I barely noticed the passing months. Our office was nothing glamorous, 2 rooms over a used bookstore downtown, but the phones stayed busy, the case files stacked up, and the mission kept pushing forward. I'd swapped the sound of my grandmother's oxygen pump for the click of keyboards and the murmur of strategy meetings. Some nights I stayed late, reviewing grant applications under the soft hum of the desk lamp. It was work that didn't care about last names or family politics, just facts, needs, and results. One Friday afternoon, a volunteer dropped a stack of envelopes on my desk. Mostly bills and thank you notes. But halfway down, I saw another familiar return address, Daniel and Karen Morgan. For a moment, I considered tossing it unopened into the shred bin. Instead, I slid my thumb under the flap. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Rachel, we heard about the families you're helping. I suppose that's something to be proud of. We don't expect you to forgive us. Just know we're trying to start over. Mom and Dad. I stared at the words for a long moment, then folded the paper neatly back into the envelope. No rush of relief, no renewed anger. Just a calm understanding that whatever they were trying to rebuild, it wasn't mine to be part of. I filed the letter in the same cabinet where I kept the Trust's closed cases, not out of sentiment, but because the story belonged there now, completed, documented, done. That weekend, I drove out to Tybee Island at dawn, the way Grandpa used to. The pier was empty except for a few early fishermen. I walked to the end, leaned against the rail, and let the wind off the Atlantic cut through me. Grandpa had always said the ocean was the best place to clear your head because it didn't care about your troubles. Standing there, I realized my internal ledger, the one I'd been keeping since I was a kid, tallying every slight, every dismissal, was finally blank. Not because my parents had changed, or because I'd forced them to admit they were wrong, but because their chapter in my life was over, and I wasn't carrying it forward. When I got back to the office on Monday, there was a new case file on my desk. A young army sergeant in Kuwait had written in, worried about his widowed father back home in Kansas. Neighbors had reported signs of neglect, and a local relative was draining his bank account. I picked up the phone, my voice steady as I introduced myself to the sergeant. We'll handle it. You focus on your mission. We'll take care of him here. As I hung up, I thought about Grandma Eleanor, about the promise I'd made in the quiet of her room, the night I'd found her water just out of reach. It wasn't just a vow to her anymore. It was the Foundation's creed. That evening, David Lee stuck his head into my office. We've got board approval for the next funding round, he said. Looks like we'll be able to take on 3 more families this quarter. I nodded, already reaching for the next file. The work didn't stop, and I didn't want it to. People sometimes ask if I regret how things ended with my parents. I tell them the truth. I regret that it had to be me, but not that I did it. Because in the end, legacy isn't what you inherit, it's what you protect and pass on. Grandpa James taught me that. Grandma Eleanor showed me why it matters. And every time we answer the phone for another soldier who can't be home to defend the people they love, I know I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. The war with my parents is over. The mission my grandparents entrusted to me has only just begun. A few minutes after my father's toast, I drifted toward the edges of the crowd, seeking shelter under the old oak tree where I'd spent countless afternoons as a kid, reading science fiction or sketching battle plans with chalk. I could still hear the hum of conversation, my father's booming laugh, the admiration in everyone's voice when they asked Alex about his latest project, the subtle but relentless current of pride that flowed from my father to my brother like electricity along a wire. I felt out of place, like a soldier dropped behind enemy lines with the wrong map. It was supposed to be a celebration, but every word felt loaded, every look a silent reminder of where I stood in the family pecking order. After the cake was cut, my father came looking for me. He moved with a purpose, shadow falling over me as I stood at the edge of the patio. His face was unreadable, hard, but not cruel. Just disappointed. He didn't need to raise his voice. My father had perfected the art of subtle dismissal long ago. He looked past me, scanning the backyard, not meeting my eyes. Seeing you in that uniform, Laura, it's a nice gesture. But you know, you don't have to pretend. I served. I know the difference between playing soldier and living it. These family things, these are about legacy. About fathers and sons. He nodded toward the house, freshly remodeled by Alex's company. You're not really needed here today. He didn't say, you're not wanted. He didn't have to. I felt it. My uniform, my rank, the sacrifices, they didn't matter here. Not compared to the weight of my brother's accomplishments, not compared to the legacy my father valued most. I nodded, jaw clenched, fighting the urge to say something I'd regret. Instead, I left. I climbed into my Chevy, slammed the door, and tried not to look back as I pulled away from the curb. It was a 3-hour drive back to base, and with every mile, the old anger and sadness gave way to something sharper. Resolve. He could keep his father's day, his pride, his carefully curated sense of legacy. He had no idea that, in shutting me out, he'd just put his company's future in the hands of the one person he trusted least. That night, I couldn't sleep. I replayed his words over and over, each one stinging like a paper cut. I tried to find some comfort in the routine of base life, PT at dawn, briefings in the comm center, the crisp discipline of military order. But the sense of exile followed me, shadowing my footsteps down every sterile hallway. I knew this was just one chapter in a long story. My family had always operated by 2 sets of rules, one for Alex and one for me. The contrast had never been clearer than the previous Christmas. I could still smell pine needles and cinnamon in the air as Alex unveiled a huge framed photograph, an aerial shot of his latest skyscraper project downtown. My father teared up, holding the photo like a holy relic. Later that evening, I tried to share my own good news. I'd just received the Defense Meritorious Service Medal, an award given to only a handful of officers each year. I'd led a cyber team that stopped a coordinated attack on the Western power grid, averting a blackout that could have crippled 3 states. When I told him, my father barely looked up from his bourbon. He patted my hand and muttered, "That's nice, Laura. But does it come with a bonus?" Then he glanced back at Alex's photo, pride shining in his eyes. That was the first time he called me a major miss. He thought it was funny, a little joke about how I'd missed the mark by not following in his combat boots. I was a disappointment, simply because I'd chosen a different path. It was my mother, Diane, always the peacemaker, who tried to smooth things over. She found me in the kitchen, voice low and gentle. "You know how your dad is, honey. He needs to see things. Concrete things. Alex's work is easier for him to understand." I nodded, but the words only added another entry to my invisible ledger, 1,000 tiny moments where I was told to shrink, to make room for someone else's light. My mother's attempts at comfort faded into the background as soon as I returned to Peterson. On base, things were simple. Orders, protocols, no guessing where you stood. I wasn't a Major Missy here. I was Major Laura Reed, call sign Vager, leader of one of the sharpest cyber defense units in the country. My life was a constant ballet between two worlds, the one where my last name meant a not enough, and the one where it meant a mission accomplished. In the command center, beneath the endless blue glare of screens, my team called me a Vager. We worked inside a secured facility, no windows, just the constant hum of servers and the dry click of keyboards. This was where I thrived, a digital battlefield. Invisible to most, but as real and as deadly as any ground war. My judgments weren't just respected, they were counted on. No one here cared that I hadn't carried a rifle through enemy territory. Here, code and instinct were the only weapons that mattered. General Drake was the kind of leader who didn't care about pedigree, just performance. The first time he watched my team neutralize a sophisticated intrusion targeting the Pentagon's medical records, he didn't say much. He just nodded and grunted, "A good work, Vager." From him, that was a medal. The kind of validation I never had to beg for. For years, I tried to translate in my reality to my family. Tried to make what I did seem tangible. But at home, there was only one language, legacy you could touch and see. After that last Father's Day, I stopped trying. If my family needed proof, the world was about to provide it in a way no one could ignore. The next morning, as I was sipping burnt coffee at my workstation, my phone lit up, Tier 1 alert. The kind of alert that makes your heart stutter. I clicked open the report. A new ransomware virus had crippled every server in a major Denver construction firm. Every file, every record, every system, locked. My eyes skipped down the page until they landed on the name, Reed Construction. For a second, the room seemed to narrow around me. It wasn't triumph I felt, not even close. Just a strange, cold clarity. As if all the years of emotional chaos had crystallized into a single, simple formula. I stared at my phone, 88 missed calls, all from my father and Alex. I watched it vibrate on the desk for a few seconds, then powered it off. This wasn't revenge. It was protocol. If you build walls high enough, eventually someone ends up on the outside. All day, the situation escalated. The virus was unlike anything the FBI Cyber Division had ever seen. As per federal protocol, when a cyber attack on critical infrastructure shows the signature of a hostile state actor, it gets escalated. Control passes from the FBI to the Department of Defense, to us. And thanks to the beauty and logic of our system, the official request for help landed directly on my desk. Late that afternoon, General Drake walked into my office without knocking, a sure sign something serious was coming. He held a tablet, his expression unreadable. "Major Reed," he said, voice even. "FBI has formally requested Cyber Command assistance with the Reed Construction incident. I know the name. That puts you in a tight spot." He paused, then added, "It also makes you the single most qualified officer in this entire command. The mission takes priority. You're operational lead. It's your show." The 88 missed calls from my family weren't apologies. They were desperate demands for the computer geek to bail them out. They had no idea they'd just become a case file. And that the person running the response wasn't going to be Alex, or Charles, or any other Reed, it was going to be me. We set up a secure video conference. On the main screen, the boardroom at Reed Construction flickered into view. Alex looked pale and stunned, tie loosened, the confidence knocked out of him. My father seemed smaller than I'd ever seen him, haunted and silent. Next to them sat a grim-faced FBI liaison, looking just as out of his depth. They looked at the camera with a desperate, pleading hope. They thought rescue was coming. They didn't know what was about to hit them. I waited in the shadows, just outside camera view, as General Drake took his seat, the seal of U.S. Cyber Command glowing behind him. The FBI agent began, explaining the gravity of the threat and the fact that the Department of Defense was now in charge. My father straightened in his chair, trying to summon some of his old command presence. "Whatever it takes, General. My company and all its resources are at your disposal," he said, his voice straining to sound strong. The irony was almost too much. His resources were in ruins, and he was out of his league. General Drake let the silence settle, then dropped the final blow. "Your operational commander for this response is our lead analyst. She's the foremost expert on this threat group." He gestured beside him, to me. I stepped forward, letting the camera capture the crisp lines of my dress blues, my major's insignia gleaming. I took my seat beside General Drake, posture straight as a flagpole, and stared directly into the lens. On the other side of the screen, Alex's jaw dropped. My father's face drained of color, shock, recognition, and something like fear flickered across his features. He looked like he was seeing a ghost. Maybe, in a way, he was. The Laura Reed he thought he knew, awkward, invisible, forever outshined, was gone. Sitting before him was Major Laura Reed, operational commander of the U.S. Cyber Command Incident Response Team. The change in the room was instantaneous and absolute. The FBI liaison cleared his throat, nervously shifting his papers. "Mr. Reed, as explained, this is no longer a private incident. You are now under military jurisdiction." My father nodded numbly, still trying to find his footing. General Drake's tone was pure command, leaving no room for argument. "Mr. Reed, your company has been targeted by a hostile state actor. This is a matter of national security. Major Reed will brief you on our tactical options." I looked at the camera. For the first time in my life, my father couldn't interrupt, couldn't brush off my words. "My team has isolated the malware," I began, my voice the same one I used for tactical briefings. "We have one shot. A counter-protocol called Blackout. There's a 60% chance it will neutralize the virus and restore your data. There's a 40% chance it will trigger a total wipe of your infrastructure. Every file, every record, every project your company has built could be erased permanently." I leaned forward, letting the weight of that sink in. "You have 5 minutes to authorize. The legacy you've spent a lifetime building is in the balance." My father, the colonel who spent my childhood lecturing me about chain of command, was suddenly powerless. I saw it in his eyes, the understanding, the surrender. For the first time, he grasped that chain of command didn't mean he was always at the top. His voice, when it came, was so faint I barely recognized it. "Authorize it." That was all he had left. After decades of control, his authority was reduced to 2 words spoken across a digital battlefield. I didn't look at his face. I didn't need to. I nodded to my team. "Execute Blackout," I ordered, my tone clear and final. And then I stood up, every eye in the command center following me. I didn't watch to see if the plan worked. That wasn't my war anymore. I walked out of the skiff, the heavy door clicking shut behind me. Duty complete. The personal connection, whatever was left, had been severed as cleanly as cutting a line. 6 months later, I found myself on a stage back at Peterson, the smell of floor polish and tradition in the air. The room was filled with officers in their best uniforms, medals and ribbons shining under the lights. General Drake pinned silver oak leaves on my shoulders, promoting me to lieutenant colonel. He leaned in, voice just for me. "Colonel Reed, your handling of the Reed construction incident is already a case study at the War College. You showed what it means to put the mission above all." He stepped back, offered a rare, genuine smile. "Congratulations, Vager." There was no family gathering afterward. No forced photos, no awkward toasts. Instead, I was swept up by my team, my real family, the ones who'd bled and sweated beside me. They clapped my back, made jokes, shared memories. Their laughter echoed through the auditorium. They didn't see me as a disappointment. They saw their commander. They saw Vager. That night, as the party wound down, I lingered on the steps outside, looking up at the dark Colorado sky. For so many years, I'd measured my worth by my family's acceptance. Tonight, for the first time, I realized I'd built my own place in the world, a place where I was valued not for my name, but for what I could do. A few weeks later, I settled into my new office overlooking the mountains. Sunlight streamed through the window, catching on the framed photo of my team at the finish line of a grueling charity run. I felt at peace in a way I never had before. That's when the email came. The sender was Charles Reed. The subject line, "E Father's Day." For a long moment, I just stared at it, heart oddly quiet. Finally, I clicked it open. It was short. Just 2 sentences. "It's next week. I'd be honored if you join us." Honored. Welcome. 2 words I'd spent years hoping to hear. Now they arrived not as a reward, but as a quiet plea. I read them over and over, waiting for some surge of anger or triumph. But all I felt was a vast stillness. The storm had passed. I hovered over the delete key, then, almost on instinct, moved the message to archive. It wasn't erased. It was simply part of a history I no longer needed to revisit. I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair, letting the last traces of sunlight warm my face. Outside, the mountains were etched against a sky turning from gold to purple, a view that always reminded me how small and fleeting most things were, including family approval. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel that old ache to prove myself, to earn my place at the table. Instead, I felt grounded, here, in the present, surrounded by a team that valued my leadership and trusted my judgment. The satisfaction wasn't loud. It was steady and real, as if the universe was quietly telling me, "You belong here." My days settled into a new rhythm. The demands were higher than ever, more responsibility, more pressure, more eyes watching every decision. But the work felt different now. I'd finally stopped living in reaction to my father's disappointment or my brother's shadow. I set the tempo, and for the first time, I was dancing to my own music. My team flourished. We tackled a series of high-profile cyber threats that made the news, protecting water treatment plants, city grids, even an election database that was days away from being breached. The accolades came from the highest places, but what mattered most were the small moments, the respect in my team's eyes, the knowledge that I'd earned my place not by accident, but by grit and expertise. And yet, sometimes late at night, I'd feel the weight of old memories pressing in, the echo of my father's words, the cool pride in his voice as he described Alex's latest deal, the look of gentle apology in my mother's eyes. The old ledger of disappointments was still there, but it didn't define me anymore. It was just background noise. It's funny how life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. One Friday evening, as I was getting ready to leave the office, I found an envelope slid under my door. There was no name, just my call sign written in neat block letters, Evager. Inside was a simple card. Congratulations on the promotion. We're lucky to have you at the helm. It was signed by every member of my team, each with a quick note or memory. Would follow you through fire. Thank you for always having our backs. You make the impossible routine. I laughed, genuinely moved. For years, I chased after validation from people who couldn't see my worth. Now, it had found me in the most unexpected of places. The next morning, I drove out of the city, winding my way up to Red Rocks Park. The air was crisp, the world quiet. I climbed to the top of the amphitheater and just sat, breathing it all in, watching families and couples wander below. I thought about legacy, how my father always saw it as something you passed down, a treasure guarded by tradition and bloodline. But standing there, with the wind in my hair and the world spread out before me, I realized a truth he'd never grasped. Legacy isn't something you inherit. It's something you build, moment by moment, choice by choice. It's forged in every hard decision, every time you stand your ground, every time you lift someone else up instead of looking down on them. And maybe, just maybe, it's about knowing when to let go of old expectations, of people's approval, even of the need to win the arguments that haunted your childhood. The next Monday, while reviewing after-action reports, my assistant, Sergeant Emily Johnson, poked her head in. You have a visitor. General Drake is here, wants to see you in the Situation Room. I grabbed my cap, squared my shoulders, and walked down the hall. Inside, General Drake was waiting, but he wasn't alone. Alex was with him, looking more nervous than I'd ever seen him. General Drake cleared his throat. Colonel Reed, I thought it was time your brother saw the real heart of what you do. Alex looked at me, eyes searching. For a second, the years of rivalry and distance melted away, replaced by something almost vulnerable. I owe you an apology, he said, stumbling over the words. You saved everything. Not just the company, but our family's future. Dad's, mine, even the people who work for us. I never understood what you did, Laura. But I do now. And I'm proud, really proud, to call you my sister. The words landed softly, unexpectedly warm. I didn't answer right away. I just nodded, letting them settle. For the first time in our lives, we met as equals, not as rivals for our father's praise, but as two adults who'd both built something real. General Drake smiled, a glint of satisfaction in his eyes. About time, he muttered. After Alex left, the general lingered. You know, Colonel, not all families get the happy ending. But you built something better. Don't let anyone take that away. His words echoed in my mind long after the meeting ended. I understood, finally, that the acceptance I'd always sought had arrived, but not from where I expected. It had grown from my own actions, and from the respect of those who knew me best. As the weeks rolled on, life took on a new kind of normalcy. I poured myself into work, but it didn't feel like running anymore. It felt like leading. There was a sense of peace in the day-to-day routine, briefings at dawn, mentoring younger officers, troubleshooting emergencies in real time. I even found myself volunteering for outreach programs, speaking at local high schools about STEM careers and the real world of cyber defense. To my own surprise, I liked those days best. Every so often, a memory from my old life would sneak up, my father shouting at a little league game, Alex breaking the family pool record, my mother quietly patching up the spaces in between. But they didn't hurt like they used to. Nostalgia lost its sting. The past had shaped me, but it no longer held me hostage. Then, one late spring afternoon, my phone buzzed with a new email. It was from my father again. Subject: Father's Day. I stared at the screen for a while, almost amused at the simplicity of it. It was the first direct communication since his awkward, tentative invitation months before. My finger hovered over the icon. I finally clicked. His message was longer this time. Laura, I know I wasn't always fair to you. I realize now how hard you worked and how little I saw it. Your mother always said you'd change the world in your own way. I just wish I'd understood sooner. We're having a small family gathering for Father's Day. It would mean a lot if you could make it. I'd like to start over. Love. Dad. The words were simple, but they landed with unexpected force. Start over. The phrase echoed in my mind, stirring up both hope and caution. I waited a day before answering. I walked the perimeter of the base, thinking it through. Did I want to go back? Did I owe it to him, or to myself, to accept the olive branch? By nightfall, I knew my answer. I replied, Dad, thank you for the invitation. I'd be glad to come. Laura. No drama, no old wounds. Just a quiet acceptance. I wouldn't erase the past, but I didn't need to fight it anymore. Father's Day arrived bright and warm. I drove to Denver, heart calm, uniform crisp. When I pulled up to the old house, I saw signs of change. A new ramp for my mother's wheelchair, fresh flowers by the steps, laughter from the backyard. My father was waiting by the door, looking older but softer somehow. He stepped forward, a little awkward, and then, without a word, pulled me into a hug. Thank you for coming, he said quietly. Means more than you know. Alex and his family were already inside, chatting with my mom. The tension I'd feared wasn't there. Instead, there was a gentle awkwardness, like people relearning a language they'd nearly forgotten. Over burgers and lemonade, stories flowed. My father listened, really listened, as Alex and I shared updates. He asked about my work, and this time, the questions were genuine, not loaded with comparison. When I described a recent operation, he nodded, not as a judge but as a student. After lunch, my mom squeezed my hand. I always knew you'd come home. Just needed to do it on your own terms. It wasn't perfect. Old habits die hard, but it was real. And that was enough. That evening, before I left, my father stopped me on the porch. I want you to know, he said, I'm proud of you. Not just because of your rank or what you did for the company, but because you never gave up on yourself. You taught me what real legacy means. It's not what you leave behind, it's what you build every day. His words caught me off guard. For the first time, I believed him. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was chasing something that would never come. I drove back to Colorado Springs under a sky streaked with red and gold, feeling lighter than I had in years. Back at the base, my team greeted me with their usual blend of affection and good-natured teasing. We were in the middle of prepping for a new mission, but something in me had shifted. I no longer felt like an outsider in my own story. At the next team briefing, I stood at the front of the room and looked at every face, seasoned officers and new recruits alike. Legacy isn't a name or a title, EI said, surprising even myself with the honesty in my voice. It's what you give, and what you help others become. If you remember one thing from working with me, let it be this: never let anyone else define your value. Build your own table, if you have to. There's always room for another seat. They applauded, some smiling, some misty-eyed. I realized then that the table I'd been searching for all my life was here, right in front of me, built out of sweat, patience, and stubborn hope. With the change in my relationship with my father came another, more subtle shift in my own heart. For so long, I'd measured success as climbing a lonely mountain, outpacing doubts, breaking out of old patterns, earning medals in rooms where no one clapped. But as the weeks turned to months, I started to realize that true achievement was about more than outlasting your past. It was about connection, about building something together. On base, the tempo of operations stayed relentless. New threats emerged almost daily: a phishing campaign targeting a hospital system in California, a state-sponsored breach attempt on the city's power grid, ransomware hitting a Midwestern logistics firm. My team moved like a single organism, alert, decisive, fast. They trusted my judgment not because of my name or my family, but because I'd proven myself, over and over, in the crucible of crisis. But now, for the first time, I found myself looking beyond the mission to the people who made it possible. I started mentoring the younger officers more actively, inviting them to walk with me after long shifts, listening to their doubts and ambitions. I told them stories, not of my medals or operations, but of the moments I'd failed and kept going. I shared how I'd spent years seeking validation from the wrong places, and how I'd finally found it, not in applause, but in honest work and real friendships. Sergeant Emily Johnson, my assistant, was the first to open up. One night, as we watched the city lights from the roof, she said quietly, "Did you ever think about quitting? When everyone seemed against you?" I laughed, the sound soft in the night air. More times than I could count, Johnson. But each time, I remembered something my mom used to say: you don't get to choose your family, but you do get to choose who you become. That's what kept me going. She nodded, eyes shining. Thank you. Sometimes I think the only way I'll ever fit in is by becoming someone I'm not. Don't, EI said gently. The world needs your voice. The real you. As summer deepened, we faced our toughest challenge yet: a coordinated attack targeting critical infrastructure in 3 states. We worked 72 hours straight, rotating shifts, barely pausing to eat. Tensions ran high, mistakes could have meant blackouts. Chaos, even loss of life. But together, we held the line. I saw the best of my team, their creativity under pressure, their willingness to cover each other's weaknesses, their trust in me and each other. When the attack was finally contained and the lights stayed on, we didn't celebrate with speeches or medals. Instead, we just sat together in the empty operations room, exhausted and proud, passing around stale donuts and strong coffee. It was then I realized this was my family. The one I'd built. The one that had built me in return. News of our success travelled fast. General Drake called me into his office one morning, a rare smile creasing his weathered face. "Colonel Reed," he said, "Washington wants you to write up this incident as a case study for the War College. They're calling it the Vega Protocol." "Not bad." "Who?" I grinned. "Not bad at all, sir." He leaned forward. "How's your real family doing?" I paused, considering. "We're learning. Slowly. I think we're finally speaking the same language." He nodded, satisfied. "Don't lose sight of them, Colonel. You only get one shot at some things." His words stayed with me. That weekend, I visited my parents again. The house felt smaller, warmer. My father showed me a picture he'd found in an old box, me at age 8, dressed in a homemade army uniform, saluting in the backyard. "You always had that look," he said, chuckling. "I just never saw it." I smiled. Maybe I wasn't the only one who needed to grow up. We laughed together, the sound full of all the years we'd nearly missed. Back on base, I found myself looking at the people around me differently. I noticed how Sergeant Torres, a brilliant coder from Texas, always made sure the quietest team members got a voice in meetings. How Lieutenant Kim, the newest officer, stayed late to help others debug code, never seeking credit. How Johnson, once shy and uncertain, had become the glue of our unit, always knowing when to crack a joke or offer a shoulder. I started a new tradition. After every major operation, we gathered for a family dinner. Sometimes it was pizza in the mess hall. Sometimes it was a cookout at my apartment complex, laughter echoing into the night. Rank didn't matter. Service records didn't matter. Only the sense of belonging did. Over time, the wounds of the past faded, not erased, but softened by new memories. Fall came to Colorado with clear blue skies and the first sharp bite of cold. Life on base was busier than ever, new officers to train, more complex threats to counter, and the usual paperwork that never seemed to shrink. But inside, I felt lighter. It was as if I'd been carrying a heavy pack for years and finally set it down. One Friday, as I prepared for another after-action review, my phone pinged with a message from my brother Alex. "Hey, sis. Mom and Dad want you to come for Thanksgiving." It'd mean a lot to all of us. I hesitated for only a moment before responding. "I'll be there." Thanksgiving at the Reeds was a smaller, quieter affair than in years past. My father carved the turkey with more gentleness than I remembered. My mother insisted I sit beside her. The talk around the table flowed easily, without the old tension, work, family, and even a few embarrassing stories from our childhood. When my father made a toast, he looked at me first. To Laura, who taught us that legacy isn't just what you leave behind, but what you live every day. And to family, whatever shape it takes. No one looked away. My brother raised his glass, and for the first time, I felt the old rivalries dissolve. I wasn't there as a reluctant guest or the other child. I was simply Laura, part of the family in my own right. After dinner, I took a walk with my mother around the block. The night air was cold, but we moved slowly, arm in arm. "I'm sorry we made you feel like you had to fight so hard to be seen," as she said softly. I squeezed her hand. "It's okay, Mom. If I hadn't fought, I wouldn't be who I am now." We walked in silence for a few minutes, the kind of silence that feels full, not empty. "I always knew you'd come home," she said. And not just to us, but to yourself. Back at Peterson, the team was gearing up for another round of training exercises. The pressure was real, but the camaraderie was stronger. At our next family dinner, a makeshift Thanksgiving in the rec room, I saw the faces around the table, officers and enlisted, men and women from all over the country, all backgrounds, all stories. We went around the table, each saying what we were grateful for. When it was my turn, I hesitated, the words catching in my throat. I'm grateful, I finally said, for the chance to serve with people who remind me every day that family is about more than blood. It's about loyalty, courage, and the choice to show up for each other, even when it's not easy. They cheered, and for a moment, the room was brighter than any award ceremony or military parade. A week later, as I caught up on reports in my office, another email arrived. This one from a high school student I'd met at a recent outreach event. She wrote, "Major Reed, I wanted to thank you for your speech. I never thought someone like me, quiet, a little odd, could ever do something important. But now I think I might try. If you have any advice, I'd love to hear it. Meyer." I smiled, thinking of all the times I'd needed to hear that very thing. I replied right away. Meyer, never let anyone else set your limits. You don't have to be loud to be a leader. Stay curious. Work hard. Build your own table, and make room for others. The world needs your kind of strength. Laura. Hitting send, I felt a quiet joy. The legacy I wanted to leave was not in titles or medals, but in opening doors for others. Soon after, I received official word from the Pentagon. I'd been selected to head a new joint task force in Washington, D.C., a huge honor and a chance to shape the next generation of cyber defense. I would have my own team, my own command, and a seat at the table where national security decisions were made. Before I left Colorado, my team threw a surprise party, complete with cake, terrible karaoke, and a scrapbook they'd made of our years together. Photos, quotes, inside jokes, and one note from Johnson. You didn't just lead us, You made us believe we belonged. As I packed my office for the last time, I looked out at the mountains one more time. The girl who'd driven away from Denver years ago, angry, invisible, desperate for approval, was gone. In her place stood a leader, a sister, a daughter, and a friend. I wasn't chasing anyone's legacy now. I was living my own. Washington, D.C. was nothing like Colorado Springs. The city never slept. Sirens, horns, voices, the rumble of late-night traffic. But as I unpacked in my new apartment with its view of the Potomac, I felt an unexpected calm. My days were filled with high-level briefings, interagency meetings, and a parade of new faces and challenges. Sometimes, the stakes felt impossibly high. But the lessons of the past were with me now, quiet, unshakable. I didn't flinch at the chaos, or the pressure, or even the skepticism that sometimes greeted a young colonel in a room of admirals and old guard generals. I remembered how far I'd come, and what it had taken to get here. The first Friday at my new post, I hosted a small dinner for my new team, some military, some civilian. I watched them interact, the hesitant young analyst from Ohio, the seasoned Air Force veteran, the cyber specialist who played chess online during briefings. I knew this was my new family, even if we'd only just begun. We talked about everything and nothing: work, travel, favorite books. When someone asked about my background, I gave the honest version. I grew up in Denver, Spent half my life trying to prove myself to people who thought legacy came from what you inherited. Then I learned it's what you build, especially when no one else is watching. One of the new analysts, a sharp-eyed woman named Harper, smiled at me after the others left. "It's good to have someone real in charge," as she said. "This place could use it." Life moved quickly. I called my parents every Sunday. Sometimes the conversations were brief, updates about Alex's business or my father's new obsession with gardening. Other times we talked for an hour, unpacking old stories, laughing at ourselves. The tension was gone, replaced by a gentler understanding. Alex called, too, for advice, not just about work, but about life. "You were right," he admitted one night. "Legacy isn't the trophy on the mantle or the name on a building. It's what you give to others, every single day." I'm trying to do that, now. Sometimes, I shared moments from my own days, good or bad, big or small. And every call ended with words we'd all once struggled to say: "I love you. I'm proud of you." Months passed. My task force stopped its first major threat, and the news made the front page. I got congratulatory messages from across the country, but it was a simple one from my mother that mattered most. "So proud of you, Laura. You made your own way, and now you're helping others find theirs. That's a true legacy." On the anniversary of my promotion, I flew home for a visit. Colorado felt different, smaller, but still mine. My father greeted me at the airport, older and slower, but smiling in a way I'd never seen growing up. "I hear you're giving speeches to senators now," he joked, squeezing my shoulder. "Bet none of them can run a command center like you." I hugged him, grateful for every step that had brought us both here. During that visit, I went for a run through Red Rocks Park, my old place of reflection. I reached the summit just as the sun set over the horizon, painting the world in gold and violet. I thought about the young woman I'd been, hungry for approval, burdened by comparison, lost in her own family shadow. If I could tell her anything, I'd say, "You don't have to wait for someone else to make you welcome. The world is wide enough for your own table. Sometimes you have to build it from scratch, and that's where the real belonging happens." Before leaving, I visited my old base, walking the familiar halls. New recruits stared in awe when they realized I was a Colonel Vager. I shook hands, answered questions, and reminded them all, especially the quiet ones, the outsiders, the dreamers, that their value wasn't measured by the past or by the recognition of others, but by their own determination and courage. On my last night, as I watched the city lights from my hotel window, I reflected on everything I'd lived. The trials, the victories, the reconciliations, the new beginnings. My story wasn't about being the favorite or the failure. It was about learning, slowly, stubbornly, that legacy is a path you walk every day. It's in the hands you lift, the doors you open, the kindness you offer, and the strength you build for yourself and others. It's what you carry forward, never what you leave behind. And in the quiet, before sleep, I knew I was finally home.